Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to look at something probably incredibly familiar, but maybe through a completely new lens.
Yeah, we've got some fascinating material here. Research and excerpts. They're titled The Power of Small Teachers.
And our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack these sources because they make a pretty surprising claim, don't they?
They really do.
That maybe the most impactful teacher you ever had wasn't, a professor or a coach, maybe not even a parent, but your sibling.
Exactly. It sort of challenges how we usually think about education. It suggests that all that messy, sometimes chaotic, but deeply emotional interaction between siblings, well, that might actually be a hidden superpower for learning.
A superpower? How so?
Well, it leverages brain science in ways we rarely consider in more formal settings.
Okay, let's unpack that core idea then. The power of small teachers. It's built on this concept that sibling relationships are just this incredibly rich, informal environment for learning, right?
Absolutely. Think about knowledge transfer, mentorship, even just, picking up behaviors. It happens constantly.
And the sources highlight how older siblings, often without even really trying, just naturally step into this role, these small teachers.
Yeah, it's not structured like a lesson plan. It's baked into the everyday stuff of family life.
Which is such a contrast to the traditional model, isn't it? The teacher at the front, information flowing top down.
Right. And this research really points to the power of horizontal learning, peer-to-peer, the
Right.
kind that happens between equals, or, well, near equals anyway.
And the suggestion isn't just that it's different, but that it can be uniquely effective.
Yes, potentially even more effective in certain situations,
Yeah.
especially, the sources say, in early childhood.
Wow. So what makes it so potent? What's the secret sauce there?
Well, it comes down to the unique characteristics of that sibling bond. You've got the emotional closeness, that deep-seated trust,
Hmm.
and just the sheer spontaneity of how they communicate. And this isn't just like a nice feeling. The research connects these factors directly to creating the optimal conditions for the brain to actually encode and hold on to information.
So it's not just kids influencing each other casually. This is actual effective knowledge transfer happening organically, kind of hardwired into the relationship itself.
Precisely. And the research is pulling from different fields to explain how it works. Motor science, neuroscience, even classic knowledge transfer theory.
They're really putting a scientific lens on these everyday family moments.
Exactly. Trying to understand the mechanics of it.
Okay, so let's get into those mechanics. How exactly does this learning happen between siblings according to the sources?
Well, a huge piece is something we see all the time. Observation and imitation. Younger siblings are basically sponges, right?
Totally.
They're watching and copying their older siblings' actions, their language, how they handle things.
The sources have that great example, Satyam and Nitika.
Yes. Satyam, who's under 3, and his sister Nikika, under 6. Satyam just naturally starts imitating Nitika.
Right, he starts asking the same questions she used to ask their grandpa, copying her tone and everything.
Exactly. And even like wanting to watch the specific cartoons she likes, asking for a smartphone just like she did. It's direct mimicry.
And that kind of imitation is incredibly powerful, especially for young kids.
Hugely powerful. And the research links this directly to the activity of mirror neurons.
Ah, mirror neurons. Okay, remind us quickly what those are. The yawning example.
That's the classic one. They're brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you see someone else perform that same action.
Like your brain is simulating it.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And the sources suggest these neurons are particularly active in a toddler's brain during this kind of imitation, really facilitating that learning transfer. They're thought to be located in various parts of the frontal cortex involved in planning movement, the sensory cortex processing touch and space, even the striatum, which is linked to habit and skill learning.
So our brains are basically wired to learn by watching and mirroring, and siblings are just this constant, trusted source for that input.
It really seems like a fundamental mechanism, a biological default, like you said.
Okay, but it's not just passive watching, is it?
No, definitely not. Physical interaction is another major pathway. And this is where motor science really comes into play. Think about siblings actually doing things together.
Like just playing, running around, wrestling.
Exactly. Or building with blocks, drawing
Uh-huh.
side by side, figuring out how to climb something.
All that active, sometimes chaotic energy.
Yes. And these sources connect this directly to concepts like action learning. This is learning that's deeply embedded in physical movement in the doing. It's not just abstract thought.
Your body's learning too.
Precisely. Your body and brain are working together.
Hmm.
So when siblings are engaged in these hands-on activities, it strengthens their motor memory, that how-to knowledge stored in muscles and movement patterns.
Hmm.
It also seems to deepen conceptual understanding because they're often problem-solving together in a physical space.
Yeah.
So that active engagement, it isn't just fun. It's promoting really deep, long-term knowledge transfer and even behavioral change. The sources mention cerebellar learnography, basically learning involving the cerebellum, which is crucial for motor control and coordination.
So it's learning by doing, but amplified because you're doing it with someone you have this really strong connection to.
Exactly. Which brings us perfectly to the third big piece the sources highlight, that emotional bond.
The feelings involved.
Yeah, the emotional closeness, that inherent trust. It's a massive enhancer of learning efficiency, often underestimated, I think.
How does that work? How does the emotional layer actually boost the learning itself?
Well, the sources explain it quite nicely. That feeling of emotional safety fundamentally reduces performance anxiety.
Ah, so you're not scared of messing up.
Right. You're less afraid to look silly or make a mistake when you're trying something out with your older brother or sister compared to, say, a teacher where approval feels more conditional, maybe?
Yeah, higher stakes.
Exactly. So that safety net, it doesn't just make it more comfortable. It actually increases motivation and makes kids more open to trying things, to learning. Younger siblings are just naturally more inclined to imitate, experiment, and follow guidance from someone they feel deeply connected to and trust.
Okay.
And that deep emotional engagement leads to a much stronger internalization of whatever knowledge or skill they're picking up.
It's like the trust unlocks the brain's learning potential.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
Okay, let's dig a bit more into the brain science ideas mentioned in the sources. You mentioned neuroscience before. What about this concept of brainpage theory?
Right, brainpage theory.
Yeah.
As it's presented here, it really shifts the focus away from just the teacher's performance, how well they deliver the information,
Mm-hmm.
and puts the spotlight squarely on the learner's active process. It emphasizes something called brain page making.
Brain page making. Okay, what does that mean?
The core idea is that learning isn't like receiving a complete file, a whole structure of information downloaded at once. Instead, you build understanding piece by piece.
So the learner isn't just passive storage, they're actively constructing something.
Exactly. You're the architect of your own understanding. Learning happens in what the theory calls pieces, chunks, modules, segments, or blocks. Brain page making is the process of taking those smaller bits and actively connecting them, weaving them together to build your own complete, coherent understanding, your personal brain page on that topic.
Gotcha. And how do sibling interactions specifically tie into this brain page making? How do they help build those pages?
Well, this is where those mechanisms we talked about, imitation, physical action, emotion, all converge. The sources suggest that sibling learning is powerful because it activates multiple brain circuits at the same time.
Okay.
You've got the motor learning circuits firing during all that physical play and imitation. And critically, you've got the emotional circuits buzzing because of that deep bond and trust.
Right, the safety net again.
Yeah, exactly. And that combination, motor activity plus emotional engagement, is apparently very potent for building those brain page modules. When the learning is tied to a physical action, wrapped in a strong emotional context, and involves direct, sometimes messy, problem solving, all things that happen constantly when siblings play,
Yeah.
the brain seems to create stronger, more robust connections. The information gets tagged with multiple anchors, the feeling, the action, the person you were with. This makes the memory encoding much stronger and improves long-term retention.
It's like the learning isn't just happening in your head, it's embedded in your body and your relationships too.
That's a fantastic way to capture it. And of course, the sources touch on neuroplasticity.
The brain's ability to change.
Right, the brain's incredible lifelong capacity to reorganize itself, to grow and change based on experience and learning. This just underscores why this kind of rich relational learning isn't just a childhood thing. The potential for growth within these close relationships continues throughout our lives.
Now, these sources make a pretty bold comparison, don't they? Sibling-led learning versus, traditional classroom instruction. How do they actually compare them?
They really lean into the differences. Sibling learning is characterized as incredibly spontaneous, happening on the fly. It's deeply empathetic. An older sibling often just gets what the younger one is struggling with.
They have that shared history, that shorthand.
Precisely. And maybe most importantly, it's naturally tailored. An older sibling intuitively adjusts to the younger one's pace, their interests, their frustration points, in a way that's, frankly, almost impossible for a teacher managing a whole classroom.
So it's like hyper-personalized instruction happening totally informally.
You could definitely see it that way. And based on the research presented, the conclusion is pretty striking. This informal peer-to-peer process can be equally effective, and in certain contexts, maybe even more effective than conventional teaching methods.
Yeah. Especially in early childhood, you said?
Particularly then, yes,
Hmm.
during those really foundational years.
That's a significant challenge to how we usually think about where the real learning happens.
It really is. And the sources argue that because this learning is continuous, it's informal, it's happening constantly within the safety of the family,
Yeah.
it actually helps reduce the kind of academic pressure and that last-minute cramming mentality you sometimes see with formal schooling.
Right, because it's just ongoing reinforcement.
Exactly. That ongoing low-stakes practice promotes deeper comprehension and genuine skill building over time, not just memorization for a test.
We've talked a lot about the younger sibling learning, the one receiving the teaching. But what about the older sibling, the one acting as the small teacher? What's the impact on them?
Ah, yes. This is where it gets really interesting and maybe less obvious to us, typically. Taking on that role, being the small teacher, is actually hugely beneficial for the older sibling's own development.
Oh, really? How so? What are they getting out of it?
Well, the sources detail how this experience actively cultivates a whole suite of critical soft skills.
Okay, like what?
Things like leadership, they're guiding someone. Communication, they have to figure out how to explain something clearly in a way their younger sibling can actually understand.
Which isn't always easy.
Not at all. Responsibility, they feel a sense of obligation sometimes for the other's learning or well-being. Empathy they have to tune into the younger sibling's frustrations or celebrate their successes. And problem solving, figuring out how to help their sibling get unstuck.
Wow, so they're building really fundamental life skills.
Absolutely. These aren't just nice to haves. They are foundational for their own personal growth, their confidence, and even their future success. They're not just teaching content. They're learning how to teach, how to relate, how to lead.
And reinforcing their own understanding in the process, presumably.
Definitely. Plus, the sources also emphasize that older siblings act as crucial role models. Their attitudes towards learning, towards challenges, their curiosity, all of that rubs off significantly. It influences the behavioral patterns and even the cognitive styles of their younger siblings.
Shaping how the younger one approaches learning and the world in general.
It really does. It's a powerful two-way street.
So this paints a picture of a really dynamic learning system operating right within families. But do the sources suggest we can take this concept of small teachers and apply it anywhere else? Beyond the home?
Oh, absolutely. They introduce a really fascinating idea based on this, the concept of miniature schools within classrooms.
Miniature schools. Okay, tell me more.
The idea is to create models directly inspired by that sibling dynamic to boost collaborative learning in formal school settings.
So consciously harnessing that peer-to-peer power that happens naturally at home, but bringing it into the classroom structure.
Precisely. In these kinds of models, students would actually take turns stepping into that small teacher role. They might act as learning moderators or guides for their peers on certain tasks or topics.
Interesting.
The goal is to intentionally leverage the power of peer explanation, peer modeling, and that interactive problem solving within the school day.
So what happens to the regular teacher in this kind of setup? Does their role change?
Oh, significantly. Instead of being the primary, sage on the stage delivering all the information,
Right.
the formal teacher shifts to become more of a facilitator, a guide on the side, maybe a moderator. They provide the overall structure, offer resources, step in to clarify or help when needed, but the core knowledge transfer in the act of grappling with the material happens much more between the students themselves.
Mirroring that sibling dynamic. That's quite a fundamental rethinking of the classroom environment.
It really is. And flowing from all this research, the sources wrap up with several key recommendations for both parents and educators. Practical ways to actually leverage these insights.
Okay, let's hear them. What should people be doing?
Well, first, and maybe simplest, is just recognizing siblings as these natural, powerful, small teachers.
Yeah.
Just acknowledging the value that's already there in those relationships.
Seeing it with fresh eyes.
Exactly. Second, actively encouraging family-based learning environments at home. You know, setting up collaborative projects, reading together, maybe even turning chores into shared problem-solving tasks, intentionally fostering those moments for peer learning.
Creating the space and opportunity for it.
Yes. Third, actively supporting older siblings in that mentoring role.
Mm,
Not just expecting them to do it, but maybe offering a bit of guidance on how to explain things patiently or praising their efforts, reinforcing the value of what they're doing.
gotcha.
Fourth, looking at ways to incorporate these sibling learning strategies, like those miniature school models, into formal education systems, actually trying to bring the principles of trusted peer interaction into schools.
Bridging that gap between informal home learning and formal schooling.
Precisely. Fifth, consciously using principles from brainpage theory and motor science when designing learning experiences, whether at home or school.
Mm.
So promoting active imitation, hands-on activities, tapping into that emotion-driven motivation.
Making learning more active and engaging.
Right. And finally, empowering parents and families with this knowledge, helping them understand why these sibling dynamics are so potent for learning and how they can constructively facilitate them in everyday life.
This deep dive really does uncover this layer of powerful learning that's happening all around us, often in places we might overlook or maybe just take for granted.
It really does. The key findings from this research just keep reinforcing these core ideas.
Mm.
Siblings are natural, effective agents for knowledge transfer. That's clear.
And that peer-to-peer interaction actively helps the brain build understanding, making those brain pages stronger.
And the emotional connection, the trust, it's not just fluff. It dramatically improves learning efficiency.
With imitation, powered by those mirror neurons, being absolutely central, especially early on.
Right. And let's not forget the older sibling, they gain crucial soft skills like leadership and empathy from the experience.
And those miniature school concepts show there's real potential to apply these dynamics in formal education too.
Plus, the idea that this continuous informal learning can actually reduce academic pressure and lead to deeper understanding over time.
And using motor science learning through doing enhances practical knowledge transfer.
And siblings fundamentally influence behavioral and cognitive patterns, shaping how younger ones approach learning.
It all paints the family environment as this incredibly potent, maybe foundational learning ecosystem.
Exactly, that's the big picture.
So, boiling it down, the core argument from this research is really powerful. Siblings act as these fundamental brain-based catalysts for learning and development. They naturally leverage mechanisms like imitation, deep emotional connection, and physical interaction in ways that are incredibly effective.
Yeah, and recognizing that, actively supporting that dynamic both within our families and by maybe rethinking some of our formal educational approaches holds real potential to unlock significant learning and developmental benefits for everyone involved.
So, here's something to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. A final thought for you, the listener, to consider. What if the teacher who actually had the most profound, lasting impact on you wasn't the one with the degree or the lesson plan, but maybe the person you shared a room with, the one you fought with over the TV remote, or built forts with in the living room?
How can we, as individuals, as parents, as educators, as communities, better recognize, value, and perhaps even harness the incredible power of these often unseen small teachers in our lives? Think about your own experiences. What comes to mind when you reflect on something important you learned, maybe without even realizing it at the time, directly from a sibling or perhaps a close peer?